My name is Susan Brotherton, and I'm the director of Philadelphia Social Service Ministries for the Salvation Army of Greater Philadelphia. So for 18 years, I was the director of the Salvation Army's Red Shield family residence, and that's when we first became aware of trauma-informed care in the sanctuary model. Over time at the Red Shield, because I had been there for so long, we started to see a change in our population. Our moms were getting younger and younger, with younger children, and were really quick to anger. And there was one really big incident that occurred when one of the moms in the facility had invited up her ex-boyfriend to come and have a conversation out front. A fight ensued, and about 20 of our residents went running out and kind of jumped in to the rest of the fight. We had never seen anything like that happen, and just sort of the risk of safety for everybody, for staff, for the children of the facility. It made us really aware that we needed to do something differently. You could see that the violence was contagious and the emotions were contagious, and we knew we needed to do something else. What we decided to do was to reach out to Sandy Bloom. We had met her for breakfast one morning to talk about the sanctuary model, what it really meant, how it can be used in facilities, and we agreed immediately that this was what we needed to do. And I have to say, it's almost like the star and the moon and everything kind of lined up, because DHS was offering funding for these services, and at the time the children's services of the emergency housing program were funded by DHS, so technically we were a DHS program. So we got the whole 5-day training for the organization for free. So we worked with Sandy, Joe Fotorero, Ruth Ann Ryan, and we had the training and then the 12-week follow-up at the Red Shield. What we did to roll out the program and roll out the sanctuary model at the Red Shield was, following the staff receiving the training, we had 12 weeks of additional training where we included a group of our residents. So they learned all about the values of sanctuary, about self, about what it means to be trauma-informed, about the nature of trauma, so that we could eventually engage more and more families in learning the model while we implemented some of the tools of sanctuary, like the community meeting, morning meetings, red flag reviews, so that it all sort of rolled out at the same time. We were fortunate because we had several older moms, older for emergency housing, meaning they were like in their 30s, who really understood what this meant. In fact, we sort of called them our pillars as we were rolling out the model, and they really helped support that and support the need for community meetings and people communicating. The change that came from bringing sanctuary was really about a change for all of the staff, in that, while a few of us identified the model, everyone bought into it, so that we really could have a democratic community, a safer community, a supportive community, that once everyone really kind of understood the difference between the idea of like what's the matter with you and what's happened to you, it was a huge change in how staff interacted with residents interacted with staff, and how we could maintain a safe environment. And I think since being the director of the Red Shield, I've now moved on to a different position where I oversee the emergency housing programs for the Salvation Army for the city, an anti-human trafficking program, and some other permanent supportive housing programs, that I've been able to bring the values of sanctuary to those programs as well. And even our newest program has been developed with those values from the ground up. So those staff, they know nothing different. The obstacles that we experience in bringing sanctuary to any of our programs is that organizational change is very slow. And when you think about it, how slow it can be, you have to multiply that by like 100, because it's even that slow. It's such a slow process. So I think having patience, I often compare it in other places where I speak to like pushing the donkey up the hill, and that you're always mindful about it. It's not something you can just let slip. And you can't say, oh, well, it'll take care of itself, because it won't, that you need to keep pushing and making sure that there's always resolution when there are problems between staff, between residents, between anybody that's kind of engaged in the program, and that we always are learning how to resolve and modeling how to resolve issues. Over time, when we brought sanctuary to our programs, we've seen a lot of change, and to me it seems really fast, but I realize it's over a long period of time, because this goes back to 2006. So it's been a decade now, so I can look back and think, oh, these things happened really quickly. I don't know if they did. Right away, we saw a lessening in violence in between residents. We became a lot more savvy at identifying when somebody was upset about something and intervening much earlier on. And that could be with staff, with residents, with even some of our vendors who would sort of act out sometimes when they'd come into our building. I can remember sitting around meetings with the other emergency housing providers in the city, and we would have to report back on how many calls to 911 we would have, which I guess to them was like an indicator of violence. Well, our numbers steadily went down to the main calls to 911 would be when somebody was having a baby, not because people were fighting. And other shelters over the course of a month could have 100 calls. So people started to wonder, like, what are you doing? Or are you not reporting these? We just didn't have them. They didn't escalate to the point where we would have to call the police. We all learned how to de-escalate. So that was a big change. And I think when people start to feel safe, they know it's something different and that we can start to keep the street outside and build community internally. I think one thing that really strikes me is that there are Salvation Army officers who are very interested in the model and how it works. And, you know, the Salvation Army is a very structured, hierarchical organization. So for them to start to take interest and take notice in this and knowing that it's about flattening the hierarchy and sharing power is really remarkable to me. I think if I was asked by other service providers about bringing sanctuary, and it's interesting because I get calls from people across the state asking about such things. I think I always encourage people to bring this kind of training to their communities because it just makes simple sense. So being trauma-informed means you understand some very complicated concepts about trauma, but using a very simple language. I think having the shared language amongst providers and residents and staff or your clients and your staff brings us all clearly on the same page so that if we're feeling unsafe, anybody can say they're feeling unsafe, and then we talk about it. I think the effort to resolve, the fact that we know that we're always modeling behaviors for others and how we do things, because that's so very powerful. So I'm always encouraging programs to do this. And I also point out that it takes a lot of patience. And it's a lot of hard work because, as I had mentioned earlier, you really are always kind of focusing on the relationships and making sure that people are doing what they need to do in a way that's really kind and mindful of the values of sanctuary. I would really love to see more programs engage in trauma-informed care. And I think it needs to be across the spectrum. I think between mental health, the recovery programs, emergency housing, the domestic violence programs, and all of them really kind of understand the nature of trauma. I think it's very easy for people to go to like one training and say, oh, I get this, I know trauma. And it's not that. It really is about organizational change and organizational structure and how we meet people and how we greet them. I would love to see ways for organizations to be rewarded for actually doing that kind of work. I think another important step to do this citywide is to create even like a sanctuary core group. When you start sanctuary in an organization, you have a core group of various staff members from all different levels of staff and that do all different kinds of things that still touch everybody. So that becomes the core that helps build this throughout an organization. So I think if we're looking to do this citywide, wouldn't it make sense to do that same thing but on a larger scale in the city? So many organizations have been trained, I think, but I don't know what kind of reinforcement there is for making it work. And I would love to see structures put in place so that when it's done right and you can get these kinds of outcomes, that you really are rewarded for doing really good work. It'd be nice to get larger grants. I think when we want to say that we're trauma-informed, that also means that we support the development of everyone that we work with. So that means that we need more training dollars, that we need more time for clinical supervision. And I think even having those, especially having those that we serve, really be able to give feedback and input into how we do this, and that really matters. It really has to matter. We realized that we needed to change some of the structures of the organization when we found ourselves really at odds with our community. So we had a younger population. They were quick to curse at us and call us names that weren't necessarily ours. And we're responding from kind of what they've been through and having to come into an emergency housing program. But I had a lot of staff and prided myself in hiring staff that had kind of come through the system themselves. So they were kind of struggling with, well, these folks are coming in. How come they aren't more grateful for what they're given? They can get through this. And some of those feelings started to turn towards anger, so that they would get really frustrated. Like our front desk staff would get really frustrated, and they might take some of that out on the community, and then they'd get upset, and then the case managers would start to get more and more involved, and a lot of these issues would get pushed up to me to say, well, let's just get more rules. What we need is more rules. We'll have rules about cursing. We'll have rules about slamming doors. We'll have rules about decorum in the dining area and not throwing food and all of these rules, so that everyone's mindful of the rules or whether or not they're keeping them, and the actual healing process isn't happening. So I think that was when we started to look at our structure, where we wanted to keep people safe, so we thought we had to structure them more. Really wasn't the case, and that we really had to allow more choice, and we had to develop a sense of understanding where we've come from. All of us, everybody's has had some sort of trauma in their lives, particularly living in a city like Philadelphia. We've experienced a lot, all of us. And I think that if we can have an open dialogue about that, to say that you're not so different from me, we experience these feelings and we understand them, and then we have a language for them. We were talking about this, and we started to be fearful, really fearful about what could happen, because fights were breaking out in like 2 seconds over nothing, or what seemed to be nothing. And she said, I'm going to go online and look. And I said, fine, you have time to do that. And she came back and found an earlier version of Sanctuary that was called Sage. And she said, look at this. This makes really good sense. And then the rest just sort of rolled. Like I said, the moon, the stars, the sun, everything sort of lined up in a perfect way to make it work. And I happen to have an amazing team, and the community itself really pulled together to make this work. And what was really interesting, a couple months after we had brought in the model and folks had gone through the self groups, and I guess almost our entire community had gone through self, and all the staff had, we had a very sudden death of one of our staff, who happened to be one of our maintenance guys, and he died actually in the building. And it was kind of a mysterious situation in what had happened. But he was like family to us, and we had a community meeting to talk about it, and immediately the community stepped up and they said, you know, you're probably hurting because you've lost this person. We're going to help. So if you'll make sure that we have the cleaning supplies, we'll cover what Ted did before. So you guys can take some time to mourn him, because you've had him for a long time. We only had him for a short period of time. And that's when we knew that this worked. What we found, since we've been using the model for so long, is that now the model is completely ingrained in our policies and procedures. So each year we'd get a little bit better. So we would have this trauma-informed language in our policy and procedure manual. We will rewrite the rules and kind of revise the rules according to the language and according to the needs of the population. And even within our job descriptions, there's an expectation that you will maintain these values and these commitments, which makes it really critical then for staff to have to rise to the occasion. You can't like play at Sanctuary. Either you're there or you're not. I think with our community, a very quick reduction in calls for police, lessening in the outbreaks of violence. Women still yell once in a while and get very angry with each other, but they know the limit. They know how far it can go. And other people will intervene and to say, we don't do that here. This isn't okay here. This is not what we do. We have other ways. And that's pretty impressive. We've been able to create programming for our youth. The kids that come to emergency housing, they all go to different schools in the community. They can stay in their own school, but they still have to manage the stigma. So we developed a program for the kids just to be themselves, have their own after-school program, where they learn the values and the language of self as well, so that it can sort of trickle then within families, and that's important. And some other areas in the work that I do are anti-trafficking program. We have a drop-in center for women who are commercially sexually exploited down on Kensington Avenue. And that program has been developed with the values of sanctuary from the ground up. So the staff there know no different. We paint the commitments on the walls of the commitments of sanctuary are painted up on the walls so the women see them every day. They do self groups. And that's just the way that they function. So now it's just become so incorporated in our work. And I think these are women that are chronic drug users. They are engaged in the life on the street, but when they come into the center, they know that this is a sanctuary, this is a place of peace. So they also kind of step up with one another if an argument breaks out and say, nope, not in here. So I would love to see in 10 more years that programs really do have the opportunity to embrace these values and these trauma-informed values, because we can see what a huge difference it makes for the quality of life for those we serve and for those of us that are working on the front lines every day. We learn about how to take care of ourselves and self-care and finding a good balance for work so that we bring our best selves possible to work. I would love to see, very much love to see these values taught in the Philadelphia school system. I think there's such a need to look at trauma and violence in our youth here in our city. I don't know how we expect kids to achieve with everything that they bring to school with them without any place to work that through. So I think that's sorely missing right now. So in 10 years, I would love to see these values kind of taught, just kind of embraced by the school, each school, and how you do that, and how you do that in the classroom, and how you teach from that perspective, and how you bring those values to kids, because they need them. They need to learn how to peacefully resolve conflict in a way that everybody can feel good about themselves.